Hello and welcome back, and today is a particularly depressing video. I say depressing, this is just going to be one of those subjects that no one ever really likes to talk about. That is data recovery. Now, if you're watching this video, I reckon you're in one of three camps. One, you're a subscriber and it's the latest video and you clicked it, and thanks for that, guys. Thank you very much. But although this video is for you, unfortunately, I do think this video is for the other two groups. The second group is people that are desperately trying to recover files. They are the people that are desperately trying to get their data back, desperately trying to, recover maybe mission critical data, maybe family photos. Maybe you're watching this because you are pulling hair out and it is 3 AM, you've been at this for 8 hours, you're sat on the floor, you are frustrated and you're angry. The third party that might watch this are people that are trying to not be the second party. Those are people that are terrified of losing their data, and they want to know ultimately how much they need to spend to not be in the second category. Now, before I go any further, I want to make it abundantly clear there is no no lovely algorithm that says data recovery equals X in terms of cost. There just isn't. This video is going to be a little bit more generalized, and if that's not something you're going to like, you might want to get out of this video early, because in all honesty, there is no set sum for data recovery. There are just too many variables. And today's video is about going through all of the variables, because all of them make a huge impact about not only the cost, but the likelihood of recovery. But because you've watched this much, let me tell you that much. Generally, I find the industry figure, in terms of dollars at least, if you're going to recover from a USB stick, it's generally about $150 for about 8 gig. For every 8 gig, you generally find an 8 gigabyte USB, USB 2 or USB 3. For general recovery from a dead USB is about $150, give or take. If for a hard drive, it's about $300, $299 or whatever they throw around per terabyte. And again, after that, it scales. But this is incredibly generalized, and the reason is because of the factors. So those figures I'm giving you just in case you need a ballpark, but for the rest of this video, you're going to find out why those numbers are useless. So, data recovery services, by their very name, is the ability to recover data that is lost to hardware tech. There are so many kinds of hardware these days that include different ways of storing data and different ways of retrieving data, and because of that, there is no one set method of data recovery. Now, we can go from the lightest to the heaviest. The lightest, of course, is software recovery. Ultimately, you've deleted a file by mistake. You delete a file by mistake, oh, it's gone. Oh, those files for Jenkins on level 3 or something, I don't know. But your files are gone. Now, generally, this kind of file recovery can be done on a software level locally. There's loads of software that you can download. Seagate have got, and they are going to get a lot of mentions in this, because last year I did a whole recovery series with them, and I'm sure there's a GIF on screen of me messing that drive up again. But they are kind of the main focus in today's video, I've got to be honest, for several reasons, which become clear throughout the video. Now, software recovery, there are tools available from Seagate, and there are tools from other websites as well. You can software recover data from drives, and depending on how much you're willing to pay, a lot of these tools will do better results. They'll strip things down by a total block by block, bit by bit recovery to get that data back. In most instances, in this scenario of data recovery, what you'll find is when you delete a file, it still technically exists on the drive. Maybe the index that lets the drive know where everything lives has basically severed the connection to that file, and until the system writes over that data with something else, or you do a defragmentation and move everything around, that file is probably still there. And that's how it can be recovered in an easy way. But more dense files, encrypted files, archive and files that need extraction, these are ones that are going to need a lot more powerful software to recover the bit-by-bit process, not just going into the recycle bin and digging a little deeper. Now, this kind of file recovery is relatively easy, certainly compared to everything else we're going to talk about in this video, but recovery of that nature can be done domestically. It doesn't require you to send the data away, but does require that in the instance of you realizing you've deleted the file, that you stop what you're doing, because the more time you spend interacting with that drive, the higher the likelihood that you're going to lose some, if not all, of the data you're trying to recover. Now, this kind of data recovery, again, there's lots of downloadable tools, and you can send it off if you so choose. And again, we are going to talk about Seagate here, and I know it's a bit of a plug, but hear me out. Because as we've mentioned on the channel before, a lot of their drives, their SSDs, all of them, but the hard drives, particularly the Pro series, you can get the rescue recovery software built in. And what that does is when you delete the file, you go, oh no, I've deleted it. You can contact Seagate and they'll either let you utilize their software in one degree, or you can send the drive off if it's a single-use drive at least, and get that data recovered from then at their forensic labs. And again, they'll cover delivery. It's included in that license pack that you get with it. The reason I'm bringing that up is today's video is about prevention. It's about, if these things happen, how you recover and spend a little bit now rather than a lot later. And that's going to pretty much be the buzzword in today's video all the way through. Because after talking about software recovery, we need to talk about the more worrying ones. Now, we want to talk about when a drive dies. So not when you've deleted a file, but whether it's an external drive, whether it's an internal drive, whether it's a USB, whether it's a mobile phone, anything, a drive just dies. It stops working. It's a hardware failure, mechanical, something like that. It's been fried, too much electricity, even just generally overuse, a platter, an arm, something just fails. This is when we go into the more costly areas of data recovery. The reason is that this kind of data recovery requires actually getting into physically the device. And this is something most end users cannot do. And this is where we move away from that $150, $300 price bracket, because this requires not only specialist tools and specialized professionals to do it, but often it requires replacement of teeny pieces. Now, if we look at this drive here, and again, this little Seagate Arm Wolf, we can see the back. We've got that board there, the PCB. We have got that SATA connector there, and we've got that little circuit running into the middle. Inside here are multiple platters. Sorry about that, mute that screen. We've got multiple platters here, which are being read by an arm on an actuator, and it reads the data on those platters. There's multiple platters inside, and if one of those platters fails, or the arm fails, or the PCB fails, or the SATA port fails, or any of those things fails in this sealed container drive, with the modern drives, a lot of them being sealed by helium as well, the result is that you're going to have to open it up in near clinical surroundings to get to those platters and either replace the platters or remove the body of data on the platters and transpose it into a working drive chassis and recover those files. Additionally, in most instances when you use data recovery services, you will almost never get your drive back. If you're doing a software recovery, you likely will get your drive back. But in almost all other instances, what you'll receive back is an external drive. You'll receive your files back on an external drive of similar or identical capacity to the drive you sent, which is an added cost on top. Because not only are you now recovering the data on that drive, you are buying a brand new drive for the data to be on, which can be, it's probably not going to be the most expensive part, given a lot of these working professionals charge literally hundreds of pounds an hour. At the top end, I'm talking, not the middle. The middle, you're talking 20, 50. But still, there's an enormous expense there with regards to mechanical recovery, which can happen so easily. In the course of this video, I've already tapped this GoPro with my elbow. It would be so easy to knock this drive off this table. This drive works right now, and if I knocked it off the table, I can't guarantee that it would. Now, data recovery of this manner is where things are very, very expensive. This is where you start spending thousands. Okay, this is where you go from have I got to spend a 3-figure with tax to a 4-figure, because this is not only because of the external drive and the mechanics of getting inside it, but also the simple fact that there's no guarantee of success. A lot of these companies will not charge on that first level. The software recovery will not charge you if no data is recovered. Once you get into this tier of recovery, most companies will charge you whether they can recover data or not. They might contact you and say, we've recovered these files, and they'll give you a list of all of the files that they've recovered, but it will just be a list, not access, not visibility, just a list of file names. And some of them may well be corrupt as well, if they're photos and video particularly. So do bear in mind that that kind of data recovery, although possible, is not the cheapest and also more prone to failure. Now again, the reason I bring up Seagate is because of that recovery service that we talked about. Now last year, as mentioned, we bashed the hell out of a drive. We sent the drive off and we got our data recovered on this external drive right here. We got our data back and it was included within the cost of the drive. It arrives at about 30 to 50 quid extra depending on the drive you go for, but for 30 to 50 quid compared with thousands of pounds, I'm happy to pay that money. So next, we'll go to the next tier down, and this is malware and ransomware. Now these have become real problems in the last few years. I mean, when I first got into this industry, you know, you had hackers getting in and you had a kind of base level of this, but in 2020 these things have escalated into such a degree that now malware and ransomware is up there in the top 3 ways in which you can lose data. I remember when it was one of these things that never happened. It was like 90s movie, I've hacked the mainframe sort of stuff. And when it comes to this kind of recovery, a lot of data professionals don't like to think about it, but this is probably harder to recover than ripping a drive to pieces and putting it together again. The reason being that ransomware, and more precisely, ransomware more so than malware, because when this happens, when you for some reason the nefarious software will replace some sort of .text file or something in your system that once actioned will encrypt your whole drive. So the whole thing is encrypted. There's a whole layer of encryption around it that you can't interact with your drive. And you'll basically be told via an email or via a pop-up, pay this link and we will unlock your data. Now the amount that you'll have to pay will be based a lot of the time on the amount of data inside that drive, the size of the drive, and obviously a little bit of work by the hacker to figure out if you're a business or a home user. Generally it will be tailored. Now, a lot of data recovery services will look into this, and what they'll do is they'll take the drive and they'll still have to perform the same things they've done previously with data recovery in the past and stripping the drive, but on a much, much harder level, because they almost certainly, unless the hacker is using an older algorithm, they almost certainly can't crack the malware encryption, because the encryption will be very distinct. They're using enterprise grade, almost military grade encryption algorithms these days. So what you need to make sure of when you go for this is try to get the company to guarantee that you won't have to pay unless that, and by the company I mean the recovery, not the horrible hackers, but make sure that they are willing to not charge you unless data is recovered, because data recovery from malware and ransomware is generally all or nothing, because it's getting around the encryption, getting to the data in an earlier format from the drive platters or the cells of an SSD. Now again, you are protected from this with that Seagate software I mentioned, but they will encounter the same problems as anyone else. The only advantage you would have in terms of malware and ransomware with a Seagate drive is just that you've got the recovery service paid for included. They don't give you any more or less ability to recover than other forensic level data services. The only advantage I can give them in this field is simply that it's going to cost you a whole lot less. Next, we can talk about the next tier of recovery, which is something that us NAS users are quite at home with, RAID recovery. Now, NAS drives that have got multiple bays inside will have multiple drives inside, and you will take advantage of something called RAID, a redundant array of independent disks. This is when you've got multiple drives with data being read and written to them across all of the drives at once. And when data is written across multiple disks, 1 or 2 disks will be selected for parity. This is when a blueprint of the data being written across the disks is put on one of the disks, and then the next wave of data, right, parity next, right, parity right, and they'll just keep writing with the parity being moved to disk. The result is, if you lose one disk, the system can rebuild the data internally. You don't need data recovery services, you don't need the Seagate stuff, you don't need any of that, it just recovers. Now, what I described there was RAID 5. There are other RAID configurations and parities built differently, but ultimately, with the exception of RAID 0, that's pretty much it. That's how RAID works. But what happens if you lose more than one disk? What if your RAID level only prepares you for one disk of failure, but you lose 2 disks? Maybe because the drives you bought were from a duff batch. They've left the factory and, because nothing's perfect, there's a slight wobble in the, production line and one batch might have a problem. The result is that you might have more than one failed disk. Now, in that scenario, data recovery services can help you, and that includes Seagate as well. When that happens, the drives have to be sent all together to the recovery lab. Generally, they might even ask you to send the NAS drive as well, because what they need is to mount the RAID. They need to be able to have the 2 or more broken disks and then recover that like they would a normal one drive. Now, RAID configurations aren't the same as recovering traditional data, because this data will often be spread across multiple disks. It will be a case of a video file that's generally been spread in the scenario of this 4-bay across 3 disks, and the parity, the little blueprint of what and where is on that last disk moving around each time. The result is that recovery from a RAID is significantly harder, and what you'll find is not only that data recovery services will charge you the combined storage of all of those drives, but generally you will have to pay hardware recovery services on the entire array. Not even if you've got 2 disks that work, unless you get quite chummy with them, chances are most quotations will mean they have to interact with that drive so much that they will need to charge you for the working drives in a RAID array, which is hugely expensive. This is when thousands start to move into $5,000 or maybe even $10,000 recovery. So it's a huge increase there. So there are loads of ways to get around this that I'm going to talk about at the end of the video. The last area of recovery is simple physical recovery. It's a single disk. It can be any of these devices, and anyone that's ever dropped a phone down the toilet that's got important photos, anyone that's had a GoPro fall off the cliff when they're doing some amazing climbing, obviously that's what I did, anyone that's ever dropped an external drive and lost it in some way, by lost it I mean broken, not like out the plane window, which would be weird. These services of a single physical recovery generally can be very, very bespoke, because these devices that I've mentioned aren't just drives. They are drives mounted in some way. In the case of a GoPro, there is an external little SSD, not SSD, in the case of this one at least, this has got a little SD card inside. In the case of the phone, there is an SD card inside. In the case of the external drive, there is a hard drive inside. But a lot of them also have internal memory too, and your data can be on the internal memory. So in that case of hardware malfunction, how they recover and what they charge, it's the moon. No one knows, because the devices are so different. You might get lucky and the data you've got is on an SD card here, in which case for an SD card you'll generally pay the same as you would for a USB drive, depending on the complexity and the compression technique used within that external card. And if you go to Amazon and companies like that, you can have add-on recovery services. The recovery services can be purchased with pretty much any hard drive or SSD, or you buy the drive and they'll go, for an extra 25, 50 quid, you can have 2 years of data recovery, which is pretty good. And you can add that on in the scenario where you need to recover that data. But it is worth highlighting that the same company that gives you that service is the Seagate Recovery. It's the same thing. It's exactly the same service, same company, and it means that when you're getting that data recovery, you can check out my videos on the Seagate Data Recovery Service to see how that plays out, and if that is something that you want to entertain. Because if you take nothing from today's video, apart from the fact that I'm clearly getting a sore throat, is that it is so much better to pay early than later. That should be the main thing you take from this video, because knowing how much data recovery services are going to cost is impossible, because there's too many variables. And if you think your data is worth protecting, and if you're going to go and have backups, and if you're going to go and have RAID protection, if you're going to go and have 2 backups, you're going to have your main priority storage and a backup and maybe another backup, Data recovery services, it's better to do it before than afterwards. And the ways to do that are having a RAID system in place, having a USB backup system in place, having an off-site cloud backup or an off-site NAS backup working overnight to back up your files, or go for storage media that can take the hit. The IO safe drive that we were utilizing in our destruction series at the start of this year, this drive we put through hell and the data is still recoverable. If you're going to go down the road where you're not going to be able to have all these extra things, go for drives that have got data recovery built in. Because yes, you're paying a premium on day one, but that premium is a drop in the ocean compared to what you will pay later on. So once again, the first party, thank you very much for watching. The second party, I know it hasn't helped you, but I hope there's things that you may have learned from this that you can take going forward. And the third party, you guys that want to preempt stuff like this, make sure you've got your backups in place, your total backup strategy, and make sure you've got recovery services in place too. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this video. I'm sorry if you're in the second party and you're sat there on the floor getting real angry. I feel your pain, dude. We've all been there. Trust me, we really have. Click like if you've enjoyed this video. Click subscribe to learn more, and I'll see you next time.